Well, good morning, everyone. I've got 10:45 on the clock, so we'll start on time, respecting the present. I've noticed that we had over 300 that signed up, and we'll probably have some more join us. We're still seeing a number of people log in here. So what I want to do is give you a couple of key items to think about for today's call. Hard to believe that finally, yes, we're approaching the start of our summer next Monday. But here are the things that we're going to discuss today. We do have some important technology updates. Discuss a survey that we're preparing. We will most definitely be speaking about the start of the summer waiver period, which is next Monday. We'll also talk about the start of sports for August 17th for the fall sports. We'll also spend a little bit of time in light of the presentation last week and the unbelievable information that Lisa Lismore shared with us. We'll also talk about that. We do envision today running a little bit longer than 30 minutes, and we always would preface that by saying we respect your time, and if you need to leave, we will always respond later with the FAQ. And on the topic of FAQ, we did not put one out this week with the knowledge that we thought so much would change day to day this week, and we were right. We're seeing a lot of changes coming to us from the governor and also some recommendations from MDH. So hopefully we can answer your questions within the chat. And then also we will, excuse me, be putting together an FAQ that will be available to you for your coaches as you start on the 15th.
Craig, could I jump in real quick for one moment on the chat? If you could just hold off on your all of your questions. We're going to be posing 3 or 4 questions during the meeting today. So we'd like for you to just save your random questions for the very end. We will make time for those. Thanks.
Perfect, Jody. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Laura. Laura?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the time this morning and looking forward to sharing some league technology pieces with you. Acknowledging that at this point, with June 15th close on the horizon, technology may not be the first things on your mind, but as we continue to move toward the summer and things start to happen quickly, just feel it's important to keep you in the loop here also. I would invite you, as Jody said, during this time to jump into the chat, and if there are technology-based questions, would be happy to have those go into the chat, and that will help to keep our discussion moving along and together. You should see my sharing screen with you. We're going to start today by taking a bit of time to look at the school administrator dashboard. This would be what currently most of you refer to as your school admin page. Those are being renamed as dashboards. In your school admin dashboard area, you will actually have a total of 5 pages that are linked together to support the management work that you do. One will be a main dashboard page, and then there will be sub pages for 4 different topics. One would be that coaches education CER reports, where you're able to monitor and view where your coaches are at in their learning. One would be a dashboard to monitor and submit eligibility pieces around transfers and reviews. A third one would be a directory where you're able to search for people throughout the league, whether that's coaches, ADs, by sport, by region, by section, etc. And then finally would be a page for you as an AD to complete your learning requirements. We expect and are on track right now that logins will be coming to you in early July for your work to get into this page. I'm going to jump right now in and show you just a quick glance of what some of those pages are looking like. So this is the mock-up of the main school admin dashboard. You would be identified by yourself and what admin region you're in. you would have some opportunities to edit work that's within your school, create an alert that goes out to your coaches' pages and notifies them of pieces, and then some FAQs that we'll provide to help you learn and become more familiar with using these resources. Two pieces here. One is we as league staff can put alerts on your page just as you can put them onto your coaches' pages. These would be things that are tasks that you would need to know about. A second one is a piece that when something needs to be done, in this case, a coach is requesting to be affiliated, you would also get a notification on your dashboard. These would both most likely also generate an email to you letting you know that something's there. Moving down the page a bit, league updates. This will probably take some of this place of the current updates that are coming out to you by email and will allow us to catalog those for you. Here's the spot to go to those 4 sub pages. And then moving down the page, you would have a bar that looks like this for each activity that your school sponsors. So this school, for example, has boys basketball that plays in section 8-2A, girls basketball that plays in section 8-2A. Underneath each of these, by opening the accordion, you learn and find more information about that sport. Who's been affiliated with you as a head coach, editing that activity page that we looked at a few weeks ago, and then doing any roster work. These 2 buttons also show up on the coaches page to facilitate that idea that in different schools, different people are responsible for those pieces. These would be resources that we as league staff provide for you about this activity. For example, rules and policies, participating school guides. Each one of these would then have that same type information underneath it. So whichever sport or activity you were working on that day, you'd be able to find that information here. Similarly, there's a spot over here for general resources, things such as a handbook, things that are league-wide resources as compared to activity-wide resources. And also a spot down here where your region secretary can start to provide resources for you also. Moving on to the next page, this would be the AD requirements page. So when you clicked on this button, you'd see this where you can manage and do your CER pieces. And then also if you need to do the head coaching course piece, that would show up on that page for you. Moving ahead just a little bit, here's that coaches education report. So you're seeing your fall coaches and then can scroll across and see all of their information. You can view their purpose statements. And I see we used to have a button here that said download this as a CSV or Excel for me. That needs to add on to there too. But if it's easier for you at some point to just download these as a large spreadsheet and sort and filter that way, you can do that also. If you have an assistant AD, if you have an AD's assistant, anybody in your AD office would be seeing all of these pieces. So again, as you distribute tasks within your office, you'd have that opportunity. Here's the page that talks about your students and eligibility. To go in and start a transfer or eligibility report, you have a dashboard that lets you see the pieces that are in process with where those are at and whose responsibility that is. And then a historical, here's how those have gone in the past. I've got a link to a bylaw violation form, and then also just some general eligibility transfer documents. These are the kinds of things that Craig Perry or Susie Hollenbeck might share with you to help you facilitate and do your job. As these go through, there's a series of notifications built in so that as the sending AD and the receiving AD, that form moves back and forth from them. Again, tasks are given and notifications come. So just a real quick overview of that page and what that looks like. And again, expect to get you in July. If there are specific questions you have or things you're wondering, those would be great to throw into chat, and I can respond when I'm done here or in FAQs. Moving ahead, just a reminder again to keep moving through those weekly tasks. We expect the coaches to get into the system in late July. So thinking about your fall and how you communicate with coaches and what opportunities you have to work with them, we'll be looking to you for help and support as you bring your coaches back in the fall. And again, assuming and hopeful and optimistic that that's all on schedule. But if you are scheduling fall coaches meetings, if you have communications going out to your coaches, just to kind of save some space in those to be sharing with coaches how some of these new pieces will roll out. You'll be in again, hopefully in early July, and we'll be getting coaches in late July or early August. And finally, just a few pieces again about the microsite. We did add the link to this on your current admin page underneath quick links. We had some people who said, I can't find that all the time, so hopefully that will help to find that more accurately if you go to your current admin page. Secondly, there's been a link added onto that with the contact information for the lead liaisons. So if you're wondering who those people are in your area to connect with, those have been added on there. There's also a survey that was put in the invite or the response you got this morning at 9 with the Zoom link. That survey asks some quick dates about your summer programs. Those were requested by this group last week. Susie's also going to pop that into the chat right now. No expectation to complete that, just people who wanted some of that information from other schools. And later today, we'll go and add that to this site, so you'll be able to see that information and those responses. And again, just a request from you to crowdsource some of those pieces. Another piece that's on the front of the Lead Network microsite, there's a quick link there. If you know of an AD change in your school, please fill out that quick form. It's going to be very helpful as we move forward with technology to make sure that we have those changes in ADs across schools so we can assign them to the right school. So again, if you're a new AD or somebody's taking your place or you're moving on, any of that kind of information you can provide to us is helpful. And then finally, just a note, coaches should be doing their summer coaching waiver on the current site. Anything you can encourage them to do that now, even if what they're doing isn't until the first week of August. I'm getting that information put there so we don't cross paths as we move from one system to another. We know we're going to have a plan B for a couple of coaches at that point, but hopefully we can get all of those coaches who are doing summer waiver pieces to jump in and do that on the existing or old site at that point. So with that, again, thank you. Lots of information and things that will start coming very quickly. Need you to get through those first few weeks of summer, and then we'll be into this by early July. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Craig.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate you sharing that information. I have been watching the chat, and there are some technology questions that if we have time at the end, we'll get to them. Otherwise, we'll address them in the FAQ. So switching now to our return to participation, and Bob and I will be sharing some information here, but I just want to share some things. Is that from last week's call and through our lead liaison call that we had Tuesday and the emails and texting that we're getting, we want you to, again, know we know where you're at. We appreciate where you're at. And like you, we have more questions than we do answers because things change daily. So we know there's urgency. We know there's some apprehension of how we're going to begin on Monday. And as I just look at some of the chat as well, a couple of reminders, things that we've stressed from the get-go, and that is that there are experts in this field better prepared than us. We brought in Dr. Roberts several weeks ago, and he shared some information with you. about what it looks like and what return to participation will look like. But for us, since we shut down in March, everything that the league is doing is geared toward returning to participation as healthy as we can be, and then limiting exposures once we do. And all of the information, the guidelines and the requirements that we are passing on to you come from the governor's mandates and recommendations, CDC, there's some great information in the CDC documentation, Minnesota Department of Health, and also Minnesota Department of Education. The other category in there is the National Federation, and they have a different approach, and I've seen this in several emails and calls to us on what phase are we in. We're not really following the Federation's recommendations, and again, those are guidelines that you can use as part of the whole package. We have encouraged you from the beginning to look at what has Minnesota said for us as members and residents of Minnesota. So we rely on the Minnesota Youth Sport Guidelines, Department of Health, the governor, and the Department of Education. And so a couple things I want to say to you as we move forward with Monday is, I've said this for a number of weeks, some key phraseology for you. The ultimate goal is to minimize exposures for each individual. And if we do that and we're cognizant of that, then we're going to help keep safety at the forefront. We're going to help us maintain the opportunity to participate. And there was a New York Times article that I saw a week or so ago that I really think helps us put this into a context that you'll be able to use with your coaches and your school district administrators as you put your information together. So it's right there on the slide. And really the key to think about in all of this as we start up on Monday is we think about this simply with a simple title of choices. Everything we do is about a choice. And in those choices we make, we have three categories: contact, confinement, and crowds. And so within those three categories of the choices we're making, number one, contact. And with contact, it is, how can we best have our kids participate with their coaches? They're going to be in contact. They're going to be in the same space. There will be differences indoors than outdoors, but the keys are always going to be, how do we limit contact? So I had an email the other day about baseball. What can we do with baseball, and how do we do this, and do we need to wipe the ball down every time that's thrown? And all the guidelines and recommendations say, be as responsible as you can for your personal and your group hygiene and social distancing in contact. And there's a difference between if Bob Madison and Craig Perry for 14 straight days only train with each other in baseball at the start of practice and throw just the two of us, versus if Bob and I had a different partner every day to throw the ball to for 14 days. You think exponentially on the total contact and exposures. And so, and using that example, when you do have your training pods, keep them consistent, keep them as small as you can feasibly with the right amount of supervision, which will help you on the contact side of things. When we get to confinement, we're really looking at what's the difference between trying to confine people to certain areas and trying to confine the differences between outside and indoors. And here's some things too that we've talked about in the past weeks. Some models state that you should have one door entrance to your facility and everybody goes through a checkpoint. And that may make sense for some buildings as an example. But the most recent information I'm seeing is if we want to reduce exposures, and you're going to have a number of sports programs in your facility on Monday, you might do something like this. The basketball team is going to enter through the east door. Anybody who's coming for football would enter through the west door. Volleyball would come through the northwest corner door by the gyms, as an example. So what you've done there is you've limited overall contact, you've confined it to a group, and you've created a door specific to a particular sport, which gets away from all of your athletes standing at one door, trying to respect social distancing to get into your facility. So those are some things I've seen in the last couple of weeks as well. And when we get to crowds, there's no question that crowds and the size of your groups only will increase the amount of exposure. And so really want you to be cognizant of that inside. Who are your essential and inessential people to be in? For example, you might have people that would come and watch a basketball training session. Those days are gone. You might have people coming from outside that want to stand on the sidelines as the soccer kids are out there in their development camp. You've added one more person to the crowd. So we want to stay away from that. And so again, those are the things, and we'll do some of this in the FAQ for you, but if you can approach this with your coaches and with your administrative team about the choices we make in contact confinement and crowds, I think that's really going to help you with how you put together your district return to participation. And so I see a lot of things here in the chat about guidelines coming from us for the summer waiver period. Eric will touch on this a little bit later as well. Our recommendations have always been you need to follow what the Minnesota governor and the agencies are telling us need to take place for your school in your school community. And my final question before I turn it over to Bob, I'm seeing a lot about the kids that are traveling out of state. I've been working with an AD at one of our schools where the baseball team or kids who play on the high school baseball team with their parents went to an out-of-state tournament last weekend, and now they're worried about their exposures and what do we do, and if they've been playing these out-of-state events where their quarantine situation is different and where their contact situations are different, what can we tell them? And the answer really is that we always want people to respect, as residents of Minnesota, what they've been asked to follow. So if you do have kids that leave the state, and they're playing in a tournament on a weekend with schools or high school age teams from a number of different states, go back to the information I just shared with you about choices. If we're trying to minimize our exposure, then traveling out of state for competition, which isn't allowed in Minnesota, according to the governor, and if we're traveling out of state for participation, think of what that does to the contact, the confinement, and the crowd issues that I've just talked to you about. We have exponentially increased the opportunity to be exposed when we change the size of our contact, we don't confine how we're training, and we are in crowds that will change from weekend to weekend. So those are some things I'm seeing. My recommendation, if you're asking me directly, what do we tell our coaches if the kids are going out of state? Tell your coaches to stay home, and the parents can take them out of state if that's what they want. Because at the end of the day, I wouldn't want you to be making a call to the league to say, our coach took a group of kids out of state, we brought them back, they infected kids on one of our other teams, and we don't know what to do. And so those are just the recommendations coming from the league. Bob, things from you and things from the lead liaisons, and anything I might have missed on this return to participation.
Yeah, great job, Craig. And I'd like to thank our liaisons again. Things like the microsite, the message that went out to schools, the survey, those are all ideas that are coming to us through them. And also for the design of our Thursday meetings, they assist us greatly. I think thinking back to, again, what Craig says about minimizing exposure along with refraining from sharing equipment. It doesn't say, I'm going to give you a football context, because that's a question we've received a lot of. Can the center snap a football to our quarterback? Yes, they can, but think about how you can minimize that exposure. So if that one center is snapping that same ball to 3 different quarterbacks, how do we minimize that exposure? An idea would maybe one-on-one, where the same person is doing so. I have not seen anything scientific that says that gloves as equipment being worn, a football glove, prevents the spread. So I would not rely on that form of equipment. And that was a question that was on, and we appreciate it. Along with the equipment, many of you have received information on the shut splash guard. When you see equipment like this that's being sent out that may be deemed preventative in nature for COVID-19, I would question that. So what the National Federation has said around the shut splash guard, which if you haven't seen, it's like a face guard on the bottom, a plastic shield like you would often see on the top part of the mask, that it is permissible and compliant. But they are not saying that it is endorsed or mandated. So you will not hear that that is required equipment. That would be a decision on yours if that's something that you wanted to buy for your team. I think there's a feeling of pressure right now that if you don't buy them right now that you're not going to get them. We would not be saying that. Don't expect that they will be mandated or required. I would also be careful around manufacturers sending this types of equipment in other sports too, as you see those. We will get any rules changes out to you as quickly as possible. Again, when you think about exposure, what does scrimmaging look like versus competition? We hear that there is no competition to be taking place in many of our sports and how they're categorized. So what would happen in a scrimmage that would minimize exposure or refrain from sharing equipment? I think a scrimmage looks a lot like a competition, and I would be very careful again in what that perception may be, along with the safety of your student athletes that are participating in and around something of that nature. I think Craig, if we could invite Eric into the conversation as well. What has he heard around the sharing of equipment? There's been some key terms like contactless competition. And Eric, maybe if you could jump in and add to or clarify anything that we've already shared.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Craig. Really good background information, lots of detail, and that's the challenging part where we're at as we start to reopen. People are looking at a lot of real specifics and trying to find ways that they think that they can be more effective, and appreciate that. I think as you continue to work with folks in your area and specifically rely on that Department of Health guideline, that's important. When you talk about the usage of equipment and the sharing of it, Bob is right on the nose. The fewer touches that you have with any particular piece of equipment, the less you're going to have the spread of it. I would talk with medical people to say, you know, would wearing sleeves be an additional deterrent? In and of itself, it's not going to be enough, but might it help? Absolutely would look at those kinds of options as you go forward. And again, limiting the number of students that interact with the same piece of equipment, the same volleyball, the same football, the same baseball, are really, really critical and important. The good news that I've seen is that the Department of Health has ranked activities by high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And that really has to do with the amount of contact that's happening. And if you compare the NFHS list of activities and you compare that to our MDH list that is the governance for Minnesota, they are very, very close to the same. And so they're seeing activities very similarly in terms of the amount of contact that could occur through a typical practice, scrimmage, or competition. And so when we talk about contactless, we're talking about contact with others or with the same item. And so that's why things like golf are really easy to implement relative to other activities, because a student can use their own ball, use their own clubs. They can play a full match, keep social distancing throughout. Most of the golf courses are set up to not even have you have to touch pins or do things like that. And so when you think about it, that's why golf qualifies in the low risk category, where others are medium or high risk. And so just continue to think about how do we reduce or eliminate contact, and the need or the desire to try to get to competition, even within practice, is just so great. And it's kind of what we've been trained in on. We have to think creatively about how we work to less of that as we go forward and still develop the skills that we're looking for with our students.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. A couple things I'm going to talk about related to your participation next week on changing the culture of how we operate, and then we'll turn it over to Lisa and Jody. Some things that we need to think about. You know, years ago, water was not allowed in practice. Water was something that was a reward, and we evolved through the last decades from community buckets of water, if you can think about that, to everybody has their own personal hydration system where they're carrying their own water bottle. And so that's one of the simple steps, is that kids have to be responsible for their individual gear and their individual water bottles, towels, those kinds of things. One of the keys I've seen through this is I've talked to Dr. Anderson, who's our specialist on the wrestling medical side of things, and Dr. Roberts, is basically that our hygiene practices need to change. This generation of high school kids isn't a showering generation, but their overall hygiene practices need to change. And so just as through the years, we've built into our summer participation opportunities these hydration breaks for water or whatever else we need them to do as they get acclimatized to the heat, you need to build into your training sessions hygiene sessions, simply like this. So if you use Bob's example of the football quarterback and the center snapping the ball, they limit the exposure and the contact by choosing to only have a 1-to-1 ratio. But when they're done, they should be wiping down the ball and putting it back wherever it belongs and any equipment they've touched. Now, the cleaning guidelines are also really interesting. Think about this. There's in the chat about should they wear long sleeves to prevent the exposure. It is on equipment, it is on clothing, it's on everything that they are around and touch. So even the recommendations of washing the clothes, turn them inside out, because it's the skin that has most of the collectiveness of the exposure. And they're telling you your equipment needs to be clean, clean your clothes inside out, all kinds of things we never thought about before. But the key, I could say, that during your training sessions is have your coaches build in breaks so that they can wipe down the equipment, and even have a wash your hands session. And also the other recommendation here is remind them to keep their hands away from their faces. And one of the most significant changes we would have would be the no spitting rule is another one. Limit the athletes of spitting water, those kinds of things. So we'll have some of those general ideas as we get you ready through our FAQ. So we'll answer to the questions that you've got in the chat a little bit later, but now we're going to turn it over to Lisa and Jody.
Thanks, Craig. And I want to give a special thanks to this group for your many words of encouragement following last week's meeting. You gave me hope during a very hopeless time in my life. So many of you shared in your comments that you are willing and ready to explore new pathways to leadership by committing to action and learning new skills around diversity, inclusion, and equity. This dialogue, which began on June 2nd with the league liaison, has really awakened this organization and so many others to use its platform to be a voice and an advocate for fairness and equity for all. And one such action step is the statement that's being shared with you. And at this particular point in time, I'd like to call on Eric, who will talk more about the statement, as well as the opportunities for growth and learning for all of our school communities, especially those that were most impacted by these challenging times. Eric?
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks for being such a leader and such a vulnerable individual, and also for providing all of us with greater insight as we go forward. The league statement that was provided to our member schools this week is really a message to our member schools, and that's where it's designed. It wasn't something that was designed for media or for anything like that. Our league stands on significant foundational principles and pillars around respect and equity for all, and making sure that our activities are accessible, that they are free from racism and discrimination. And we need to know and recognize that. And then we also need to move forward and take action. And so there are two pieces within this. One is the kind of the envelope in which the league statement is connected, and that has further guidance and further information around that. This is designed to be, one, a statement of who we are and how we operate and what we require within our programs, but also it's designed to be a tool for you to use within your schools. And so as you think about where you are within your school programming, we heard from a number of ADs around, you know what, we just have very little diversity in our area, so this seems just really far away from us at times, and we may be uncomfortable or unsure about where we are with this. I would encourage you to engage in conversations. Invite others into the conversation who might help you become more adept and more skilled at being able to carry on those conversations. Now is the time for you to be reflecting. We are not in season, we are not in school in most cases, and so it's hard to necessarily have that same kind of contact, but to be reflective, to talk with your coaches and your advisors within your programs, and to start thinking about where are we with diversity, with equity, with inclusion, and how do we continue that forward. We know that what we put out to our schools is going to create thought. It's intended to create dialogue. And as we move forward, intended to create action within our schools. It also creates a baseline and a requirement for how our activities need to be operating, how they need to play out when we do have competitions and bring schools together again. And so now is the time to really reflect, to think, to plan, and to move forward with that. The last part of the statement in the letter itself talks about us in thinking forward to building unity and working toward the elimination of racism and discrimination. And that is really the call to action that we have. And I'm going to turn it over to Jody as she talks about some of the considerations as we move forward. So Jody.
Thanks, Eric. And so as we move forward and we look at how do we gather information, how do we serve and best serve you, we want that relationship to be a two-way conversation. We need your voice in informing league staff on your needs, on how we best can support you, on your best practices. Our intent is to create resources and to provide you with growth both personally and professionally, and how you assist your coaches in doing the same. And so as we really begin our first steps in what that strategy is going to look like, we want to rely on the lead liaisons. Tuesday, our conversation is really going to focus on what are your needs and what are you currently doing within your own school communities. Now, given the fact that we know you're not directly working with your coaches and your student athletes at this time, we really, for those who may be doing some of those things, we really want to begin to gather what is it that you're doing and how can we best support and serve you. So if lead liaisons could reach out to those ADs within your area to have that conversation.
12 or so, and about 12:50, even takes us an hour.
Again, on what you're currently doing and what your needs are. That would be really helpful. Thank you for muting. And then secondly, just so you're aware, at some point on Monday, we're going to be sending information out. Joe Ehrman is going to be offering another session to a national audience with some of his best resources from across the country to continue the conversation that so many of you were a part of last week around developing your own racial narrative. And so that information will be going out to you as well. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bob to share or to share any additional perspective that he has around the action steps moving forward.
Thank you, Jody and Lisa. Great job. And again, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into this conversation on the needs. And we know that while we continue this conversation in your communities, how do we best assist you and your coaches to have these conversations with your student athletes? We know that quickly transfers into what competition looks like, right? What are we going to experience when we get back to competition? And those are some of the conversations that we will continue to have. But for the moment, we're going to continue in the space of how do we assist you in facilitating these conversations and the resources that you have around them. Thanks again, Jody and Lisa. Craig?
Yeah, thanks to everyone today. Again, we had over 300 people on the call. We appreciate your continued contact with us, and just some final reminders as I've been scanning through the Q&A. There's some great questions in there that we will get to and put into the microsite, but we just want to continue to let you know that we're here to serve, and everything that we're trying to do is to help you do what you do with more education and to do it with more efficiency, but at the end of the day, to make sure that we're looking after the best interest of your coaches and student athletes. And so as we move forward on Monday with the start of the summer waiver period, a reminder that that is your permission given to your coaches to have access to your kids during the summer, and that those coaches then would use guidelines to work with your kids in your buildings and facilities that were created by your administrative team, and many of you with your school board help and with your administrative team help. So thanks again for joining. We will get to the Q&As and get them out to you, and I wish you all a great start to what we finally will have for our summer participation. Eric, any last things to add before we close?
Just a couple of quick comments. One, first of all, as Craig said, thanks for all that you're doing within your schools and in your communities. Our goal here at the League is to empower and to inform you so that you can best serve those folks that are in your programs. We get many, many questions from coaches asking us directly. If you can help us by reaching out to your coach and asking them to bring their questions to you, and then you work through us, that is the best process. And it also helps to inform them and keep you connected as to what the questions might be and how to best answer that, because you've got not only one coach, but probably 40 coaches that you're working with to try to put programs in place. So again, your partnership and support is great, and we're going to do everything we can to assist you as a leader within your school to do what you need to do and do it well. So thank you so much for your time.